Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid / Joe Biden.
Yeah, you'll learn about Reid's comment there as soon as the episode starts. But we were trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about this week, and Reid and I were just saying, well, shoot, there's a lot of stuff happening in the media right now, a lot of current events, and so we thought it'd be fun to just kind of get on and riff and see where it took us. So something that Reid thought would be like a digital snack of like 15 minutes went as per usual, like probably 45 or 50 minutes. But I thought it was fun. We touched a lot of different subjects, from the election to antitrust with Google to Apple search engine to 70s, 80s, and 90s action movies. So I thought it was fun, Reid.
Yeah, I did too. I greatly enjoy these types of topics, even if they don't end with like action items to take back to properties. I thought it was fun. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the world. That's a nice way of putting it. And some of them will have a more direct impact on the apartment industry, and some not so much, but still fun fodder to talk through.
Yeah. Well, we figure we'll do this every now and then when there's a bunch of stuff happening in the world. So we'll test it out, and maybe it'll stick, and maybe it won't. But I think today is a fun listen if you just want to kind of catch up on tech news with us, or I guess a little bit beyond tech news, but I guess just overall big news.
Yeah, I do have a recommendation that next time we do this, which won't be for another 4 years, we will dress up and play the role of each candidate, like full bore, and argue our points around ad technology and other things that potentially will impact the industry.
It's kind of like I was going to say more informative, but maybe that's not fair, but kind of like an SNL skit where we assume the character and try to argue on the other person's view.
Exactly.
That would be really fun. Maybe we do that anyways beyond, because I like that concept of just like try to. It's like, did you ever watch the movie? Was it called Game Change? Game Change, where they did the McCain and who was his running mate?
McCain. Oh, Sarah Palin.
Palin. Yeah, I guess you haven't seen that movie, but they did a movie where they reenacted McCain bringing Palin in and what it was like on the campaign trail. And at one point during the movie, and I forget all of a sudden who plays her, it's a really famous actress, but she was phenomenal. And at one point in the movie, they were like, well, we're going to have to do some like mock debates with you, because we can't just like keep you like, behind the scenes the whole time. And so they start doing where they play the other people, and it was really well, like, funny and well done. But she's like, why are you giving me such hard questions? And they're like, these are these are not hard questions.
These are softballs. Yeah. Is the earth flat? Hey, come on, give me something easy.
Yeah.
Well, Newsroom did that well too. You and I both really enjoyed that series. That was a Sorkinson, but they had those debate preparations that were pretty awesome. So anyways, we digress. That's the point of Digible Dudes and this episode.
I was about to take you one more, but I'll do that offline. So anyways, if you want to hang out with us for a bit, then stay tuned. Okay, Reid, so you actually did change your name on this Squadcast, that what we use to record the podcast. Usually it's like Telemundo Robot 37 or something that it auto assigns you, and this time you gave yourself your own name. And it's apt for our topic today.
Yeah, maybe I did and maybe I didn't, David. Maybe Squadcast is more political of a platform than we realized. Yeah, I have Joe Biden underneath my name, so nobody misses out on the inside joke, since we still don't have video yet. This is just an audio podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, today we were trying to go over what to talk about, and there's just a lot of like big news stories and current events happening. So we thought it'd be fun to just talk through three of them. So the three that we're looking at, or that we're going to cover, is one, the election. So today is Monday, November 2nd. So the election's tomorrow. Then the Google antitrust case, and then Apple possibly releasing a search engine. So to move on your Joe Biden comment, Reid, here. What the heck what do we want to talk about when it concerns the election?
Well, I just figured any major event like this, and certainly politics, has a huge impact on our lives, more than I think a lot of people realize. But considering the friction and the build up to this one, it made more sense for us to touch on it, at least, and how we think it may or may not impact our industry. So we always try and ground ourselves there. But I think the obvious impact all of us are bracing for is more protest, and potentially, and sadly, I think a lot more violent protests. And so, we have clients at this point, I think, in nearly 40 out of 50 states. And so, we're certainly going to be probably hearing some from them, and already have, at least I've heard some of the concerns about, what this means for their cities, and ultimately some of their communities that are more in the thick of things. So probably the best example of that is Minneapolis. We have a pretty strong footprint there, and due to the George Floyd, death, and protests from much earlier in the year, they are extremely uneasy, and kind of on tilt with this whole thing. And so I think, the question is, how much, and we've talked about this with several of our clients, do they want to get involved, if at all, meaning in the communication they're having with residents, or, what they're putting out on social posts, as far as not their position on which side, but more about, how they're going to manage through it, or any kind of warnings or updates. And then what if their residents do take to the social media channels, right? Because a lot of people are going to be very vocal one way or another, however things shake out. The other thing that I'm curious about is, will we see, if Trump were to be reelected, more of kind of the restrictions when it comes to these third-party platforms? Like, will we see more of an impact or effect from Biden, when it comes to a lot of the regulations, and a lot of the spotlight that's being put on data privacy, the fair housing, side of things, etc. So that's just a jumping off point, as far as some things I'll be curious about. Of course, it came up a lot back to kind of those platforms and ad tech platforms, that Trump was on the verge of closing down TikTok, which a lot of our clients were showing some excitement and interest in, and wanting to pursue. And that's, I'll say, just temporarily subsided. But that gets into, like, kind of more macro, like what happens when with one or the other, as far as some of the data and third-party ad technology companies, the big ones, like how we see that playing out.
Well, so first of all, Reid, I know you're not into 90s action movies. I mean, I'm looking for your confirmation on this. I feel like every time we talk about a 90s action movie, you're like, I hate that actor, actress, whatever it is.
Oh man, don't get me started. I love action movies, but maybe 90s was not a good decade for me. Certainly whenever I hear Keanu Reeves' name pop up, I start to get pretty sour pretty fast. But there were some.
I thought you never had seen an action movie in your life. I thought, because every time we talk about one, you're like, oh, that blowhard. What's one that you go for?
Well, I'm a fan of the first two Terminators, and I think both of those were, well, no, one of them was in the 90s. The other one was in the 80s. And then fan of the Aliens franchise, but not the last, whatever it was, 6 or 7, but the first handful. Of course, I think that started in the 70s, maybe even the first one. Yeah. So what else? I don't know. Where is this coming from? Don't keep me in
Well,
suspense.
immediately one of the quotes I was thinking of was from a movie I know you're not a fan of, but Nicolas Cage in The Rock. He's
You
he
know
goes
I
off
like
on this.
that one. I told
Oh,
you I
really?
like that one. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Did you know Sean
Well,
Connery just died? He was
I
freaking like
know.
93 or something. I didn't know he's that old, but yeah, he just died like a couple days
Yes.
ago.
Yeah, I know. I was super bummed about that. But it's one of my favorites. And in the beginning of the movie, Stanley Goodspeed, who is Nick Cage, he goes off on his wife about bringing it, or his fiance about bringing a child into the world, and how you must be a maniac to do that, whatever. Fast forward, 35 seconds, and she's like, Stanley, I'm pregnant. And then he's like, oh, this is great. And she's like, Stanley, 7.5 seconds ago, you thought this was a moronic thing to do. He's like, gosh, a whole lot's changed in 7.5 seconds, right? That's how I feel about this, like, about politics. Like, I've been following for about 7.5 seconds. Is what's happening in the world. So this is
That's
why you're
longer.
leading.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
longer than I thought you were going to say. Yeah. Well, hopefully you
But
cast the ballot this year.
I did. I voted early. So first
All
of
right.
all, it was news to me that, like, not everybody had early voting. It's like not the same in every state. So that's like a problem to me. Is that right? Shouldn't
Yeah.
this be equal across the board? So I'm sure other people are like, yeah, duh. This is what we've been talking about. Secondly, though, like, it's really interesting to me that, like, as you're playing, like, well, what if Trump wins? What if Biden wins? On one hand, on the outside, I would have figured, oh yeah, Trump is more about, like, letting less regulation, less free market, like whatever, right? But then you bring up the TikTok incident, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shoot, I guess you can't blatantly go that way and say there's going to be more regulation with Biden than with Trump, because he was going to just shut down a company, or was that's what he was at least, like, posing for. So yeah, it's just really interesting. So do you see this, when you said bring it back to the apartment industry, do you see there being a more positive outcome based on who, like, for the apartment industry, like, which is a I don't know, a better situation, or for apartment marketing, maybe to help condense it a little bit more?
Yeah, that's really tricky. I think it's similar to this whole recession and economic crisis. There's winners and there's losers, and that would stay true, I think, with either candidate. Meaning, if Trump wins, there'll be winners and losers within the apartment industry, and if Biden wins, and I think it's fairly obvious just knowing the parties and what these guys represent, which subsets of the industry, would come out, would have a good outcome, and which ones wouldn't. So when you think about fair housing, affordable housing, the C class properties, I think they're not going to have a good outcome if Trump's reelected. That being said, you could say also, hey, if the economic trends continue, they could do fairly well, but occupancy doesn't translate to rent, as we very well know. So it doesn't matter unless they're actually able to collect checks. And so I think Trump's obviously huge on real estate. Everybody knows that. And so I don't see like development and investors I think too worried, if not probably rooting for a Trump victory here, as you talk about deregulation, or the ability, certainly when it comes to the investors, to procure and develop funds, and get the capital they need to keep developing. So there's a lot. A great question, a lot to unpack on both sides. I think what's interesting about Trump, and just bring it quickly back to the TikTok, is he, in a way, like, isn't really representative. I think that's been brought up. Well, I know it has tons of times, of the Republican Party. It's more a Trump party, and he had to choose one side, and it was an obvious which side he was going to choose in order, to get elected in the first place. But I say this because when he looks at like Facebook, for example, him and Zuckerberg, many people have made comments about that relationship, or perceived relationship, with Facebook being the most reluctant to take down, fake news and fake videos, in particular, on the Republican side. And so what does that really say to us and say to the industry? And then you have the Dorsey over there with Twitter, and you have the folks at Google that have been way more committed there. So anyways, yeah, Dorsey, Twitter, and then Google. And I'm sure it goes beyond that. I haven't paid that close of attention, but just that he's super outspoken about those platforms and highly critical of them, right? If they're not supporting his position. And at one point, they did shut down the Trump Twitter feed. I don't know if you knew that, David, but they did that temporarily based on how kind of the vitriol and how intense it had gotten, along with the fake news. So I'm just pointing that out because I find, Trump, like most people, entirely unpredictable. And so it makes it really hard, to I guess, imagine or predict, forecast what kind of outcome we're looking at if we have another 4 years of him in office. But generally speaking, I mean, a lot of people, and, I don't mind saying, will classify the Democratic Party as the we party and the Republicans as the me party. And I think, with Trump, that, I mean, I said I'd behave myself, but I think that's hard to argue. And so if that's the case, it's pretty easy to imagine who the winners and losers will be within multifamily, at least from my perspective.
Well, I don't think I was totally aware of Twitter shutting down his feed for a bit. But what is like interesting to me is what you're saying is like a lot of people feel that Facebook is starting to posture about just trying to get into a position to where if Biden is elected, it's not seen, they're not all of a sudden like brought in into some sort of government legal throwdown because they've been not reacting to the fake news as you're talking about. So some people think it's more of a calculated move that Facebook's starting to amp up their own policing, in which case it's really interesting to me, at least, to think about like, well, what if Trump does win again? If they were just posturing for, a Biden win, then would they all of a sudden go back into dormancy, where they're not doing anything versus like, I think, in fact, I think it was Friday, Google, Dorsey, so Twitter, and Facebook were back in front of like the Senate again, and they were pointing out like, hey, Twitter, you removed 62 of Trump like tweets or something, and you haven't removed anything from Biden, so you're showing favoritism. And Twitter's argument was, well, heck, they broke the rules, or he broke the rules 62 times, and Biden didn't, and that's why we didn't pull Biden down. So don't make it look like we're trying to play favorites here with Democrats over Republicans. So anyways, I just think it's really interesting to think about how the tech industry may react if, depending who wins, because it does seem like this is like, even though I've only been paying attention for 7.5 seconds, it does seem like this is the first time that there's like some really major tech implications because of the antitrust suits that are going on and the fake news and, complaints and things like that.
Yeah, totally agree. Thought you might even bring up disparate impact there for a second when you were, walking me through the Twitter numbers. Is disparate impact, or is this, black and white cases here? Yeah. But I guess the more obvious, concern, getting back to where I started, was, on what the protests are going to look like, and will this affect, leasing? Will we see any change in trends? As people, may actually favor staying somewhat secluded and just letting things blow over. Meaning, it could be a few months. I mean, many people predicted this of real, discord and tumultuous, kind of environment that we're getting ready to experience. Maybe some of the worst in our country's history. So I hate to be, negative about it, but certainly if that did happen, that could have some impact. And it's not to say that, I'm saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just merely pointing out that leasing trends could be affected in the near future. And I think I again want to say it was coming from a property in Minneapolis, but they're prepared for that. They're saying, between November and December, we already know that we're going to get hit with seasonality, but we're bracing for something far worse, based on what they're anticipating in the city.
Yeah. Well, I would, I don't have as much like obviously knowledge on that front. I simply have it on the more on the ad network front. And what I think is interesting is, and this will kind of roll us into our second topic, which is the Google antitrust. But like, let's say that you have let's say Biden wins. And as you're saying, there's more data privacy and other concerns coming down. And then obviously this Google antitrust lawsuit just got filed like a couple weeks ago. And the big concern around Google, or the main thing, was not what I expected. I expected it to be around like maybe their cloud computing, or maybe like local maps or something. But the complaint right now is around Google's actual search behavior, and the fact that they pay Apple an estimated $12 billion a year to be the preferred search engine on Apple, which is interesting because if you remember, like the Windows antitrust lawsuit back in the 90s was because Windows was like, oh, we're going to preload Internet Explorer on here for free, and that's going to wipe out Netflix, which I always had a little bit of an issue personally, because I was like,
you mean Netscape?
Sorry, yeah, Netscape. Thank you.
Yeah.
These things are always tough for me, because on one hand, like we as a country have decided that like the free market is the way to go, right? Like it's all about like the invisible hand or whatever. And I studied economics in school, and that was like what everyone's talking about, right? But yet if you play the game, so our game is, money effectively, right? Like earn as much as you can. But then if you play it too well, in a sense, all of a sudden you come back and you get slapped. In this case, Google's getting slapped because they're paying someone else to make them the preferred. And that $12 billion is a lot of cash to be the preferred like search engine on Apple. And so I would have tying this back to your last comment, and then what I'm saying, if Biden were to win, is like that could only get worse, right, for Google if it's all about these data protections and privacy. And this takes us almost into the third topic I want to talk about today, but Apple's search engine. I swear I'll give you a chance after this last part, but the thought is like Apple's been working on its own search engine for years. They had actually hired away Google's chief like head of search like 3 or 4 years ago. But they said that this guy's just going to work on AI. Don't worry about him. It's nothing to do with search. It's just AI. Then Google's getting smashed or whatever, right? About the Apple thing. So imagine that Google says, you know what, we concede the antitrust isn't about the Chrome browser. It's about our search and how we're so dominant in search. So we're going to have to give up Apple. So they give up Apple. So then who's going to replace that vacuum, right? Well, makes sense that Apple's going to try to do it. But now all of a sudden you go from like one company dominating search to another big ass company having half of search or whatever, because most search happens on mobile phones and Apple is half of mobile phones. So my only point here is like that could be a huge shakeup for like when it comes to advertising for apartments. And in particular, if you think about, all the other things that may be implicated. So people are really pushing on Google, or have been saying, hey, Google's going to come out with its own ILS competitor, yada, yada, yada. Do you think that makes them, with this antitrust, are they that much more likely to roll out like a competitor to like apartments.com or something, or like trying to squash the ILSs at this point? If I'm Google and I'm getting grilled right now, I'm like, anything that's seen is touching search at the moment, I'm starting to like, let's put a freeze on this at the moment, right? And so that is going to have that's where there may be the biggest, I guess, impact on our industry.
Yeah, well, a lot there to unpack, but it's I think we should just jump in now to kind of both antitrust. I mean, they, like you said, connect well. I'm trying to remember if this was the 7 powers, like if this came up in that book, but or if this was in one of the product books, but they were pointing out that Microsoft's, and I'm sure already knew this, algorithm, I don't want to say was more sophisticated, but was either more accurate, was bringing back better results. There was some sort of improvement that was demonstrated, like clear improvement on Microsoft's search engine, and yet they still sit whatever. Like, I don't even know the percent right now. You would be able to quote those kind of stats better than me, but their point is that Google has the experience, of Google is as valuable to them as the algorithm, their data, all this stuff, is that they have now created such a embedded experience in globally for search that can't really ever be undone. It's just a wasted effort. And so that's, I guess, my response, and it's not mine. It's just what I had heard or read, but that will protect them, and it almost makes them invulnerable. So I get the whole like Apple, has all, you have the built-in market, but I'm one of them. I'll just tell you, I don't know yet. I should hold judgment, but I can't see myself using their search engine. I know I'm probably going to quickly hop over to Google, and I'll be annoyed. I'll probably be cursing the phone for trying to force me to use their new search engine. And I'm just going to move over to Google and bookmark it or whatever, use the Google app. So anyways, that's my initial like take on, how successful I'll say Apple's going to be, how disruptive this will be. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I think it'll be a default, but I think a lot of consumers are like, so maybe you'll no longer default to Google, or maybe like the best way to do it would have when someone starts up their phone the first time, it gives them the choice. Like, what do you want to be your default search engine? Because you can change to other search engines on Apple or Android. It's just not the most intuitive.
Right.
And I think, like, to your point, like, I remember Apple Maps came out like a couple years ago, and you're on iPhone and I'm on Android. And at first you were using or trying Apple Maps, but very quickly I remember you getting frustrated. I don't know if you like fought through that and if you still use Apple Maps, or if you went to Google or Waze again.
I'm more on Waze. It's kind of pathetic, but I probably 60% Waze, 20% Google Maps, and 20% Apple. And it's like, and a lot of it is just me being lazy, or Miranda will send me like, hey, here's where the soccer field is. And it's pinned right on her Apple, on her phone. And so I ended up using Apple. So I'm more Ways though. And I get where you're going with this. So I am susceptible or open to like, a switch or a new habit if it's a superior experience, but I have a hard time imagining, frankly, and I'm not trying to be narrow-minded here, but a better experience with Apple's search engine than what you get on Google.
Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting is like when I've used the Bing search engine before, it's way more full featured than Google, meaning like there's more like how Google has started to move towards like showing images and videos and search. Like Bing's been doing that for a long time, which I think they changed their name back from Bing to Microsoft Search or something. But they've been doing those kinds of like extra, like, well, it's kind of like in a way like Google's kind of like Craigslist, right? Where it's like Craigslist has been the same forever and they're like, I'm not changing. Google, they change their stuff all the time, but it's still almost a Craigslist like experience, right? Versus some of these other search engine alternatives have given way more like sizzle to their before. I think the issue might come. So let's just play this out on the advertising front. So one is, I don't know that we accomplish anything by all of a sudden having Apple have its own search engine, and like that's going to make the world better, because you're going from one massive conglomerate owning search to another massive conglomerate not only owning search but owning so many other things too, right? And so it's almost like you need an upstart, and by basically Apple jumping in there, it doesn't really help an upstart at all. In fact, it probably makes it that much harder for an upstart to get to get going, because before you had one major thing to try to compete with. So like DuckDuckGo goes after privacy, and they're like, that's how we're going to beat Google, right?
Yeah. What? I just was wondered if you were going to beat me too, saying the words DuckDuckGo, and you did. So congratulations.
Yeah. Well, they had one. What was their feature? Like privacy, right? Well, what is Apple? Apple, like a lot of times they tout privacy as their thing. So what if all of a sudden the Apple search engine is like basically rips off DuckDuckGo at this point? They're like, F it, we're going to be the most privacy focused, whatever. It's like now poor DuckDuck is like left out to die, right? It's like, well, shoot, we just killed the one upstart we had.
Yeah, DuckDuck becomes the odd man out. Sorry, this is just making me laugh. I'm picturing, a circle, right? Duck, duck, goose, and duck, duck.
Yeah,
is the victim. Odd man out, as you said. So I think the tricky part when you mention like the privacy search engine is how can it be really an effective search engine if it is in fact being super strict with its privacy. I suppose you can just draw a very clear line in the sand, and it's like none of your search habits and data is being shared with anyone, like meaning any third party. How you build a business around that, a business model, is a whole nother matter, right? Because what drives that whole machine over there at Google is the fact that it's advertiser funded. So I don't know what the business model is going to be for Apple, but that will be fascinating as well. I don't know if you got that far, if you mentioned anything, but I'll let you comment there, and then I want to speak just in general, I guess, to some of the antitrust. And I don't know if you've seen. I encouraged you and Nicole. I don't know if you got to it yet, but the social dilemma. But it some of the, I'll say, learnings or insights from that come into play here.
All right. Well, I'll quickly comment and then go back to that. Well, I don't think that it's gonna. I don't imagine Apple's gonna try to like give away search for free, right? They're probably gonna want to try to make up the $12 billion. Like, let's say Google pops off, they're not getting dollars from Google anymore. Then, like, are shareholders of Apple just going to want to take a $12 billion hit? Like, probably not, right? Because that was all margin. And now building out search is not inexpensive. We know that because Microsoft has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on it now. So you're going to want to try to monetize it somehow. So I think immediately they're going to have to fall in line with what Microsoft and Google do, with basically a bid model, because there's no other way to do it. And if you do that, then I think that's the other reason. So I believe at this point, like, probably Apple search is probably going to be similar in like effectiveness, if you will, to Google. Like, it's probably not going to come out and be half as good, right? It's probably going to be like mostly as good, but not quite. And some of that is the personalization, but it's just at this point, like, they have enough data to do search well. Microsoft does search well, and it's got like 3% of the search market. So it's like, I'm sure Apple can come in and do fine too. And so that's why I'm thinking like it's probably going to be monetized. And if it's monetized, then that's where it may impact apartments some, because now you've got to somehow like split your $1,000 search budget across Google, maybe Apple, yes, Microsoft. Microsoft, though, very few people we know. You've gone on your Bing tirades before about like, let's be the best damn Bing agency there is. But the thing is, Microsoft's not preloaded as the default on your cell phone. And if half of cell phones are Apple, and now the default is Apple, all of a sudden apartments are going to have to be good with, advertising on Apple search engine. And that's going to be hard to get your agency to start managing. Oh, I'm going to do twice the work with an immature platform now and for the same spend. So I think that could impact apartments quite a bit. And then that may be the only reason why Apple search doesn't end up doing as well at the beginning, is because a lot of the success on Google is from a search engine perspective. When you're searching for like businesses, like services, is that it has a very good advertiser model, because sometimes the algorithm is not good at learning what the hell you mean. Like, I was looking up beacons again, like the Google Beacon project. And when I was looking for like Google Beacon alternatives, the organic search, terrible, did not provide me any value. But all of the sponsored listings, I clicked on all of them because all of them like were speaking to me like, oh, Google Beacon project dead, use us instead. I'm like, hell yeah. And so if all of a sudden the advertising platform is not very good on Apple search, people are going to get quickly frustrated and say Apple search sucks, when it's just that it doesn't have the advertisers built up yet to make the search a decent experience.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I had a good thought there, but I got too caught up in what you were saying.
Well, you can go to Social Dilemma if you want. I did watch half of it, but then I got kind of nauseated on the thing. So
yeah, it's easy to get nauseated on it. I'm sure that a few of the, or more than a few of the people that they had on it were getting death threats afterwards. But I think that there was an article that I had mentioned to you maybe more than once from a few years ago from the Washington Post that was talking about data privacy and cookies and, kind of the pros and cons. And the obvious one is that, meaning if you provide access and allow cookies, that you're going to actually get a better experience. But then, of course, the flip side of that is that you're giving you're selling your soul or whatever, you're giving all your data away. And so, what do you do with that? And it's, I think, a dilemma on both sides, using their word, meaning the consumer and the businesses, and certainly the ones that are, vested to the tune of $12 billion, how they want to approach that. But generally speaking, I do worry, like, with the fragmentation, about a poor experience, I'll just say, as this kind of unfolds, from a consumer standpoint. And then that ultimately has an impact, what you're saying, which is um, the advertiser flow, and then the dilution. And so from an advertiser standpoint, meaning like those that are trying to reach people on Google, how will they handle it? I think, I've told you this, when it comes to the directories with the ILS, that I think you almost want to be harder to find. And it's actually a good thing to have more options, because if you take the right approach, then you can just front load, right, and get the best quality leads using that whole dating, online dating criteria, where it's like the only way that somebody's ever going to find you is if they're a perfect prospect. So when it comes to search, and I think the way that you scale it is the way we're doing, and Google's actually advocating for a lot of agencies they work with, are scripts. So we're now in this era of, right, scripts, that are dominating. There's a lot off the shelf, but then a lot of companies like Digible are building their own. And that would allow you then, if Apple does, which seems imminent now, comes on board, you have Bing, you have Google, and let's even keep DuckDuckGo for a little, that you think in the same terms, and you just front load your strategy as much as possible on a $2,000 budget, and you don't worry so much about who's got market share. It's like, this is a performance based environment. If I take that strategy and I can automate it through scripts, don't I end up actually winning, not losing?
Yeah, well, I quickly get to the kayak example, right? Like, when all those travel sites were popping up, Priceline and Expedia or whatever, like Hyatt.com, then you have like the kayaks of the world that come in and they just start aggregating it all. And that way you can just go straight like to one place instead of searching in 9 places. And it's funny because like, as there have been a number of startups that have said, we're going to aggregate Lyft and Uber at the same time so that you can quickly find the cheapest ride for you. And they're built by just accessing the Lyft and Uber API and then telling you which one's cheaper right now and then ordering the car for you. So I could very much see a similar thing where it's like, well, shoot, that you have these like minor startups. And the unfortunate thing about these startups is it sounds smart, like, oh, totally, I want to see which is better, Lyft or Uber right now, but they end up dying off because like it's just not a sustainable business model. Like you can arbitrage a little bit, but then over time you just it gets too competitive and you can't. But I imagine that the same sort of thing would happen where all of a sudden you have like a Kensho or a Quizio or some sort of bid budget management platform that's like, I'm going to help you manage Bing and Apple and Google all at once. And then, hey, heck, why don't we throw Facebook in there? And what's super interesting about it, we'll bring up a fourth topic real quick, but I don't know if you saw, Reid, but Microsoft released its own like bid budget management system, but it's aggregating like Google and Facebook and Bing like all at once. It's basically allowing you like as a small business advertiser to go into one platform and launch your ad campaign. And it's like, well, that's really interesting to me that Microsoft developed that and put it out in the wild for free for anybody to use, kind of like an AdWords Express for everything at once, because now they're obviously giving dollars to someone else. But I guess the long-term play is there. Let's get the market convinced that Microsoft is a player and will play nice with everybody as opposed to trying to be anti-competitive there.
No,
so anyways,
I didn't know that. Reminds me of this incredible company and platform called Digible and Fiona. Where it's like, you can spend all the money you want on ILS, but eventually you'll see. I mean, and it's not that, I mean, I'm kidding, but you get what I'm saying. Like they're trying to build, as we are, kind of this platform that sits on top of it all, or underneath it.
Exactly. And so I could see the same thing happening. I mean, it's almost going to have to happen as you get fragmented. Because I think about like, I know we get frustrated within our own company, but we have like Dropbox files and Google Drive files. And somebody Slacked me a file and it's not in either. And so it's like, well, how do I how do I search? And so there's these companies that have developed a universal search where they search all of your logins at once to try to return you the stuff. And that's what could end up happening here is my point. But to get back on your topic is like, if you start making all of this super privacy dependent, like now your search experience is just not going to be, it's just not going to be as good, right? Because now if you can't share that amongst like all of your systems, then you just start having a really crappy time. So
that's right. Just somewhat connecting this still on that Washington Post article, but to the social dilemma. But they pointed out that the other side of this is that if you do give your data and you just say, I got nothing to hide, I want the best experience possible, you're not really getting that. And this is not to be, I don't know, try and make this as clear as possible, but it becomes a house of mirrors. So if you provide all your data, you're quickly getting profiled, and therefore, and I know a lot of people understand this, especially with an election, but if you are choosing to read content on CNN, guess what kind of content's coming towards you. And if you're a Fox fan, then you're going to get the Trump and the Republican content. And that goes so much beyond that. Those are just super easy examples to understand. And so is that what we want as a society, to be shaped by these giant tech companies, which is what that whole documentary is essentially saying, is they're now kind of developing and influencing our future, our personal identities more than anybody could have realized. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so that we talk antitrust, but then the DuckDuckGos are just, it's unrealistic. At this point, has that train already left? And this is not to be dystopian, but this is the direction that we're headed in for the unforeseeable future. I think I don't want to say Democrats, because both sides have advocated for more data privacy, but is that the only thing that could potentially slow things down? And it's not just data privacy, but it's data, governance and having some controls about the extent, that these algorithms are influencing our behaviors. So that to me is the only hope, but, be prepared, if they're successful. And it would need to be more than moderately, but if they're highly successful with some of these new rules and governance, and a lot of this is coming over from from Europe, it's going to be it's going to be different for us. It'll be interesting to see how subtle it is, but online, as far as the content, the search results that we get, if there's a big disruption here, as far as data privacy and governance.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that that website I sent you over I think it was the weekend, the Get Out and Vote, or no, what was it? Get That Vote.
Well, I have to be honest on this, don't I? No, I have not clicked on that one yet.
I sent it. So there's I would highly recommend anybody check out this website, but it's called getthatvote.com. And it was produced by this advertising agency out of Salt Lake City. And it basically is just cobbling together all of these all of the profiles basically of the candidates, where you have Trump and Biden, and it pulls together their organic presence as well as their advertising presence. And it's a whole website, like case study about it. But I brought it up because it's really interesting going through like the Google estimated ad spend for both candidates and where they're spending the ad spend and how much and over time. But in particular, you mentioned about the House of Mirrors, and they have a stat on here. I have it right here, where they say like, what's the social media echo chamber of the two candidates? And they looked at both Trump and Biden followers and then said, okay, how many of these followers follow other like similar, like somebody for the other side too? And the overlap of interest between the two candidates is 1.3%. So there's not a lot of overlap among the two like populations that are following over either. So to your point, Reid, that's exactly what it is. I felt like that was like, when I saw that stat, I was like, this is the most conclusive thing to the echo chamber, the House of Mirrors that you always talk about.
Yeah. And appreciate you sending that. Feel like a schmuck for not looking at this before this call, because it would have been valuable, but super fascinating. I'm just scanning through it right now. But yeah, that echo chamber is intense. And it's sad, because I think most people don't want to see this polarization, kind of the radical behavior and nature of the country right now. And frankly, these tech companies are a huge part of the problem. As much as they give you access to content and news, it's not a coincidence, typically what type of content and news you're getting, and therefore it just fuels the fire. So where and how do we get more of a centrist look at the world? And whether it's locally what's happening around us or whether it's more global. And definitely don't have the answer for that, but it's a big challenge. And I would think the only way that anything does change is if we do get much stricter with these ad tech companies about the data that they're gathering and how they're using it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say one last thing as far as like this whole situation before I'm kind of out of not relevant material, but probably spoken more than anybody wants to hear. But my oh shoot, now I gotta remember what the hell I was gonna say. So if you were to ask me though, like a month ago, which of these giant tech companies is up for a whooping first, I don't think I would have picked Google. Like between like Apple, Twitter, Facebook, Google, is it not surprising that Google's the first one to get walloped here and not like a Facebook, obviously? And what blows me away about it is, again, they're not walloped on the way that I would expect. Like the Chrome browser to me makes sense because we already did the suit against Microsoft to the browser. And if you're going to talk about, usually these antitrust cases are about like splitting companies up. Like you'll remember the phone companies where they got split up so that there was competition. But I was thinking that they would force like Google to split the Chrome browser off because that's why Google owns so much search, or a big reason, because it's the default, and or like the Google Maps business or something like that. But instead, they don't focus on Facebook, let's say, because that's where I thought the heat would have come. And instead they go to Google, and then they're like, oh, Google, and we're not concerned about like all of your other stuff that you do. We're concerned about the one deal you made with Apple on the $12 billion. I'm like, you could have picked so many other things to go after. I don't know why you focused on this one monetary deal. Because now, I mean, I guess theoretically, to beat it down, Apple could just say like, we'll redo our contract with Google. Google pays $6 billion to be in consideration, but we'll also charge Microsoft $1 billion to be in consideration or whatever. So anyways, I'm just saying I would have totally got this one wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That being said, it's still early, and I'll use a comparison with the NCAA investigation from the FBI, but that was like a 10-year investigation. And when it first kind of the news broke about some of the violations and the big programs that were involved, it seemed minor. And I think a lot of people were like, what's the big deal here? And why are you focused on, I'll just call it minor violations. I couldn't recall exactly what some of those were. But the more, like the further along that it went, and then this started to come out that the FBI was doing that deliberately. I don't know that this is a fair comparison, but just meaning that they were strategically piecemealing some of their findings, and that there was a much bigger kind of overall, I guess, agenda. And so that's what I wonder with this antitrust is this just the beginning for Google? Because there's mounting pressure from both the public and the private sector for change. And so this could just be the tip of the iceberg. So it'll be interesting to see if there's more to come here.
No, it's a great point. And as you said earlier, a lot of what we're doing here is being forwarded by the EU, right? And a lot of the fines that Google has been paying in Europe are actually not related to this type of thing. It's related to like the knowledge box or whatever, and how you're stealing like facts from the New York Times and not sending people to the New York Times first for your web results. And so again, I would have thought like, let's go after that part of the publisher angle. But I guess what you're saying is maybe this is one almost like a distraction. And then we're going to hit you with all the other stuff that you already got hit on in Europe.
Yeah, and it could just be also viewed or a shot across the bow, right? Over at Google that also has them rethinking maybe future plans. And certainly I think we already know Facebook has, I don't know how much you could say they've pivoted on their own VTO using our vernacular, but their 3 to 5 year strategy on the heels of all the protests and call outs, both from the government again and the public. But if I am Google, or if I am Amazon, or if I'm Facebook, certainly, these announcements and suits would have me thinking a little differently about what's realistic, and how I would be approaching kind of my global strategy for the next 5 to 10 years. So that could be another element, is like, we don't need to like expose or get you for, all these more obvious and bigger issues. If we just have this kind of shot, message will be heard and understood. Consider yourself lucky. But if you move forward with some of those take over the world plans that, you've been operating under for the last 15 years, then you stand to risk a lot more.
Yeah, well, I guess I would just say, like, well, one, maybe maybe it actually will accelerate some of those take over the world, because like you're going to get sued separately in Europe than you are the US. So it's like, instead of like trying to own one locale, why start spreading to India, or whatever. But the other angle of that is, I guess, I just hope what shakes out from all of this is something that feels, I guess, as fair as possible. I mean, I say that because what I think wouldn't be healthy is if, like, we ding, let's say, Google on something, but we don't do something to Facebook, or we don't do something to Twitter, or whatever, like to Amazon, right? You want to talk about anti-competitive? How about Amazon, like, knocking off all the products they see that are successful, right? Like, so I would hope that there's some version of fairness that happens here, and not like where it's like, well, we got one of them, and then you leave the rest, because it doesn't teach anybody anything. It doesn't make Amazon reconsider what it's doing if all you do is, it's like, well, someone's going to get shot, but it's better to be like, to lean hardcore into this first, and then wait, because maybe you'll get fined or maybe you won't, right? But let's not change your behavior, because the damage, the fine or whatever, is never as bad as the gain that someone got by leaning into it. I mean, that's what they say about like tax evasion, right? Like, chances are so low, so you might as well evade taxes and then apologize afterwards.
Yeah, becomes a bit of risk analysis, like when you're, I think similar, well, not similar, but like with federal prosecutors, obviously they pick their cases very carefully. And it may be that we won't ever see them like fully undress, I guess, or change, disrupt these giant, ad tech companies. But that, again, if they spread their scrutiny and have these smaller suits, antitrust and whatnot, that they feel like that is the best chance to, I don't want to say teach a lesson, as you said, is anybody learning anything out of this, but rather than go all in on just one, I would die to be a fly on the wall, frankly, like on those conversations, to hear strategically who they're going after, how they're approaching it, and then what they see as their likelihood of winning, because obviously they don't want to look silly either, and they could end up spending an incredible amount of taxpayer money, on lost causes, where there's just there's not enough there, as some of our friends like to say.
Yeah. Well, you made me feel like there needs to be, this is the Netflix show, like, of the future that needs to get made, right? Where it's like you have like a Billions meets like House of Cards, but with like, that's all around like the tech news and what we're going after. That would be fun.
That would be fun. You and I would definitely both get the popcorn out for that one.
Yeah. All right, Reid. Well, I guess I have some other current events maybe we hit next week that apply well for this industry, but anything else for today?
No, I think we did our normal, tangential selves.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we'll catch the rest of you next week.
Later.